Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's initial review for Westworld Season 2. In this video, I will give my overall brief thoughts on Season 2 of Westworld. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Season 2 of Westworld. If you haven't seen all of Season 2, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So I call it initial review because I'm making this just after having seen the finale, and I binge watched the first 9 episodes a couple days ago, and then last night I watched the season finale, and so I'm really processing all of this. This season is really heavy. There's a lot to it and a lot to take in, and I think I am definitely going to need to watch this season again before I can really fully digest it. But I got a busy schedule at the moment. I had this video planned for today, and I don't really have time to push it back a couple of weeks, so I have no idea when I actually will be able to watch the season again, but I definitely do want to watch the season again. First of all, that tells you something about the season right there. That's my favorite kind of shows. It's my favorite kind of films. The ones where if you go back and watch it, you get a new perspective, you learn different things, and there's definitely would be the case here, because there's a lot of revelations at the end, most particularly finding out that in the future time storyline that Charlotte was actually Dolores, and that really puts a spin on things. So that mainly wants me, is what makes me want to go back and watch the season again to see actually, and I'm sure I'd pick up a lot of nuance actually knowing that to be the case. But it's not just that. There's a lot of like little details and heavy things, and it's really great like reading, watching other reviews and reading articles and hearing other people's different opinions and different takes on the show. And I absolutely love that. I love something that's really rich and heavy, and there's a lot of facets, details to explore. You can go back and see it a bit more. And it's funny because I always think that I haven't seen the original 1970s movie that this is based off of, but from what I hear, it's a Michael Crichton project, and about like an amusement park where the attraction starts killing the people. So it sounds just like, the basic premise sounds just like Jurassic Park to me, which, Michael Crichton did years later, where, there's dinosaurs in the park and they go around killing people, which to me, even is a very simple premise. Like, the first Jurassic Park was fine, it was suspenseful, but I don't see it as a masterpiece as many people do, and just screw all the sequels and Jurassic Worlds and all that bullshit. It's just emulating the same thing with dinosaurs killing people. So it is so impressive to me that they took a concept which to me just seems like the same thing, but with robot cowboys killing people instead of dinosaurs, and they made it like really complex, really thought-provoking, really questions the nature of humanity, questions the nature of existence, so all these existential thought processes and analysis and complicated storylines and different character ends, and it is majorly impressive. Like, the fact that Jonathan Nolan could take such a simple premise like that, I do wonder if they could do the same thing with Jurassic Park and do a version of it where it makes you question life's existence or whatever, instead of just dinosaurs killing people. So I am super impressed with the show in that regard. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, this is season 2. How come you didn't say any of this in your season 1 review? Or this is kind of old news. We got this a year ago. I will say up front that I did like season 2 better than season 1. I think it had a lot less flaws. It was a lot more contemplative, in my opinion. There was a lot more ins and outs. If you saw my season 1 review, you see I did think positively of the season overall, and I did think it was a good show, but I thought it was way overhyped. For me, I thought that was just being way too hyped. It was a bit overrated. People were talking about it's the best show ever. It was the best season of television. Even now, some people are like, season 2 doesn't even compare to season 1, which was the best thing ever. Which I actually completely disagree with. I think season 1 had a lot of pacing issues. It took like 5 or 6 episodes to get started. It was really slow paced and boring for most of the beginning episodes, to be honest. And then I think there was a few to be honest, there's a few pacing issues in the later half of the season as well. Like, a lot of people seem to love the season 1 finale, which I wasn't as impressed with. I still liked it, and I still liked the season overall. I still think it was great. Still made me want to watch season 2. But I think season 2 was a lot tighter. It was a lot more interesting. There was a lot more packed with information. It didn't have the pacing issues. It didn't have the character faults of season 1. So I think, in my opinion, season 2 was very clearly the superior season. It's what really got me to like the show. But having said that, I still don't think this is the best show ever. I wouldn't put this in like my top 5 favorite shows of all time, which I know a lot of people would. I might put it in my top 20, maybe, I don't know, it depends on how season 3 goes. So I did really like it, but I don't think it's the bee's knees. I don't think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, personally, but I still really enjoyed the season. Really thought it was great. And as I said, I want to go back and watch this some more, so my opinion of the season might actually go up. Upon repeat viewings and upon further contemplation, the more I think about it. Because here, and I'll get to the finale later, but here's the thing. After watching the finale, my first reaction, especially that post-credit scene, was, what the fuck is going on? I do not understand this. I don't get it. What does this all mean? Now, there's a lot of films that are now, I count amongst my favorite films of all time, where that was my initial reaction. So, in fact, when I had that reaction to a film, but it's kind of in the way that, not in the way of, what the fuck is this shit, but in the way of, this seems really intriguing, really fascinating, but I don't understand any of this. Whenever that happens, it tends to end up being my favorite film, or one of my favorite films. I tend to love it even more once it's explained to me, once I digest it, because what it means is that this is so complicated that you can't get it on the first viewing, that you have to read articles about it, watch it again, hear other opinions. I actually love that. That makes me appreciate a film or episode or movie or whatever more when that happens. So my opinion of the season, as I said, may go up in the future, and that's why I'm just calling this my initial thoughts, because I just watched it. It's fresh in my head, so I'm not going to get into too much detail on any of the intricacies of this dense show and what they mean, because I still haven't processed any of that, so this would be more of a surface level review. Anyway, so let me get into the different storylines. Let me start with the Man in Black, or William, as we now know. Ed Harris is an older man. He didn't do much in the present storyline at first. It took a little while for his storyline to get going. He was sort of being egged on by Ford, and through his storyline we got the impression that Ford is still alive in some form in the park, because he's able to jump to these various different hosts and talk to William and sort of egg him on and sort of play this game. So William goes on a quest. He enlists his old friend of Lawrence, and he, when this town gets taken over by these asshole federales or whoever, he helps kill them and save his family. And so Lawrence goes off in this quest to help William find the game or whatever, and it all leads to Val Beyond, like all the different storylines do. So that was all well and good. That was pretty interesting. What was more interesting to me was the sort of flashbacks we got with his father-in-law, the Delos, and how he like that one episode in particular that showed him that was a really well-structured episode. I absolutely loved that. I thought that was great how we meet him and we don't know what's going on at first, but we slowly learn that this is actually, it's his consciousness after he died, but they're trying to implant it into a host body to sort of give him immortality. And it reminds me a lot of Black Mirror episodes, like I can't remember, San Junipero and stuff like that, where the people are able to have their digital life after they die, and they do something with their body, with their consciousness, and use technology to sort of almost infer immortality. And so I really like that. It's a very interesting concept, and I love how the fact that it didn't work. It didn't quite work. That they were trying because he was super rich and he owned the company and everything. So they tried to do it, but it kept faulting. And that was so interesting the way they played it out, where you didn't know that it was, a host or, consciousness after he died or anything like that. They just had the younger William keep coming in and repeating the same conversation. And the big reveal at the end, I thought was amazing. I really loved that. And of course that did pretty much become the driving force of the season, of what the main thing is about. It's about, because there's the whole secret in the Forge or the Valor Beyond was all about the company trying to brand immortality, trying to find a way to make this work so that people, when they die, can put their consciousness in someone else. So I think that added a really rich texture to the show, which I really liked. Now, as for the specific, you also meet William's daughter Emily. First see her in one of these other worlds. I think it was called the Raj or something. It's like earliest 20th century India, I think, or something like that. And she's in there, and she gets chased away because that's when everything starts going crazy. But so it shows that the hosts everywhere have gone crazy, not just in Westworld. And yet all the ones we focus on later in the season are just in Westworld. Makes me wonder what happened to hosts in these other worlds, but whatever. Anyway, they go crazy, so she has to run for her life, and the companion she's with actually gets killed, and she ends up in Westworld. Oh, big shock. And then she just so happens to end up running into William, a bit serendipity, but whatever, it works for the story, let's go with it. So it's interesting meeting her and her quest, and William thinks that she's fake, that she's not just a host that Ford created, and kept saying, oh, Ford, blah, blah, and she keeps trying to insist that she's willing, that she does want to help him, she wants to recollect and reconcile, and all this sort of things, and they go into little adventures, whatever, and eventually it leads to her admitting that the real reason she's there is to take him down, to lock him away, and that she does blame him for her mother's death. And that whole episode 9 flashback we get with William, her backstory, and how her mother died. Amazing stuff. I absolutely love that. I might say, again, it's too early, but I might say that's my favorite episode of the season. I absolutely loved it. And of course, the big shocking ending after she reveals this. Freaking William's gone off the deep end and thinks that she's a host and kills her. And then once he realized that's his actual daughter he almost kills himself. But then he thinks maybe I'm a host. So that was the big cliffhanger coming into episode 10. Is he a host? And I was thinking, no, he isn't, and it would probably be dumb if he was. And sure enough, he's not. He's not a host. And Dolores comes across him and is like, oh, so you're questioning the nature of your existence as well, which I thought was a pretty cool line. And so he goes off on the adventure with Dolores, and he betrays Dolores, but she smart enough to see this coming, and so had planted that bullet to sabotage his gun and make his hand explode. And then you don't really get much of William for the rest of the finale. You see him at the end, that he had survived the aftermath. You see him recovering at the very end. But as for the after credits scene, which I will give you a spoiler warning if you're not aware, there was an after credits scene of the finale, so if you haven't watched that, go watch that first before you watch this. That was the main thing. I was like, what in the fuck does this mean? I don't get it. I don't understand. Is this saying that William's the host the whole time? Is it saying that his daughter that he shot was a host, or is he saying she's a, what the hell is going on? So I had to read like articles and stuff and interviews with the showrunners, and they pretty much explain that this is a future, in the distant future, far future. In fact, if you watch the scene carefully, you see that it's the Forge, but the whole area is degraded and deteriorated. So it's indicating it's like years into the future, which is interesting. So the William we know and love is human, completely human, but this is sort of years, decades in the future, where William has done pretty much the same thing that Delos has done, where he's put his consciousness into a host to try to be immortal, and that his Emily, we see there, is just a representation of her. It's a, I don't know exactly if it's a host or whatever, but it's not actually her. Could actually be her consciousness, but I doubt it, because why would her consciousness be doing tests on another consciousness? That I'm not very sure of, but it's not actually her. So she was a human being the whole time, so he did actually kill her. So all that is set in stone, but this is just decades in the future where he's trying to end. He's reliving, instead of, Delos would just relive the same day every day where he got up and brushed his teeth or whatever, but William is reliving the events of that we see in this finale, basically, where he's at the forge and he gets shot by Dolores. He's reliving these events over and over again to see if there's any difference. So this is where we get really the key of his motivation throughout the season, which I thought was really great and explained a lot, is that in the whole thing about Ford's game, because I didn't really get that. I didn't understand what was meant by it, but they explain it here that Ford had showed him this profile because they were building up all these profiles in the park, and his profile showed him as an evil guy, pretty much. It showed him as a psychopath, as someone who's very disturbed, and when his wife saw that profile, she killed herself. So that affected him a lot. So he wanted to prove, part of his reason for going to the park and doing all these things is to prove that he can change his behavior, that he's not, that profile is total bullshit, and that it's not as simple as that. And so, but when he's reliving the events, that's what he says to this, Emily, we'll just do quotation marks, that's what he says to this in the post-credit scene. But she says, then how come you're doing the same thing every time? So the fact that he is repeating the same actions every time he does it kind of disproves that he can change, or he does have free will, or whatever. And that is a bigger theme in this finale, which I thought worked really well, which gets into other various storylines. So that explains his motivation. That's why he was going to the park. That's why he wanted to beat Ford's game, because he wanted to prove that he had free will and that he wasn't what the profile said he was, which I thought was a great revelation. It really worked. I think it makes the storyline overall work. Love the storyline. Anyway, let's move on over to Dolores. Now, Dolores is interesting because in season 1, even at the end in the finale when she killed a bunch of people, I thought of her as kind of a hero, as kind of a liberator. She's being oppressed and she's fighting back. But this season, they kind of get more into her character and her motivations. You're not really completely on board with her. I think I heard some people refer to her as a villain. Don't think she's a villain. I think the term like anti-hero might apply more than villain, because she's not a good person, and sometimes she's not doing the right thing, and a lot of times you're not cheering her on. You're not on board with what she's doing, even though you understand her motivations. But she's not an evil person. She's like coming from a good place, but the stuff she does is very shady and questionable. In particular is her relationship with Teddy, because we see them have a really strong relationship, and Teddy is her rock. Teddy has always been her rock, and even when she goes around killing people, he's always willing to do what she needs to do and is by her side the whole time. But then eventually she's like, I see the type of person you are. You're a good person at heart, at nature. And he, smiles. It's like, oh, I love you, blah, blah. And then she's like, that's not who I need, though. And so she, restrains him physically and forces this programmer to reprogram him to make him an evil guy. And then, so a few episodes we see Teddy going around, it's like he might as well have a goatee on because it was the evil Teddy, and which I like. I'm not mocking it, because I think that actually was awesome. I think that really worked. Seeing that it shows how fucked up Dolores is as well. It does make you question her even more. But what I love is a bit later we find out that Teddy at some stage he's come awakened like a lot of these other hosts who remember everything in all their past lives just like Dolores does. So even though he is changed to be this evil guy now, he remembers what it was like to be a good guy, and he remembers what Dolores did to him, to make him not a good guy. So even though he's at heart this evil guy now because he's been reprogrammed, he still remembers that he was violated basically and altered. So he pretty much does the same thing she did with him, where he starts out like, oh, I love you, blah blah, I'm devoted to you, blah blah blah, and she thinks, oh, this is all great, and then she's like, and that's why this isn't gonna work out. And at first, he gets a gun and she thinks he's gonna kill her, but he's like, no, I would never hurt you, I will protect you until the day I die. I can't protect you anymore, which is a great way to say, hey, this is the day I die, is right now. And then kills himself. Very powerful stuff. I absolutely love that. Again, this gets into the whole way the show plays on the nature of existence and feelings of existentials, using these quote-unquote artificial beings to question what existence means and what it means to have free will. But yeah, I don't want to get too much into that because I'll go down the rabbit hole, but I love that scene. And so but before that, we do get adventures of Dolores going around. Like at first, like she convinces the federales or whoever those people were to help her, and then she betrays them, kills them all. I don't know if I cared that much for it. That seemed kind of unnecessary. I didn't really get why she did it, but whatever. It was fine. I didn't really have a big issue with it. And then she goes and breaks into the headquarters to try to rescue her father, which this was really interesting. Absolutely amazing stuff. I loved it. And I loved how to her it was her father, but to the Charlotte and the other people it was this, the secret code or the key that they really wanted to get in order to unlock the secret to immortality. But their main motivation, let's not kid ourselves, was the almighty dollar. But it's interesting that they had that motivation, but Dolores is just like, I want to rescue my father. But of course, she eventually learns what it is that they want, and when she does learn that, she wants to stop them and takes the key from her father's neck. So she has the that little orb that is the essence of who he is, and now she wants to use that for her own purposes. And we see from the finale that she goes to unlock the forge or whatever with Bernard, which I'll get more into when I cover Bernard's storyline. But and I'll get to her ending storyline when I cover Bernard. So let's put a pin on that and let's move over to Maeve. Now she was my favorite character of season 1. Not so much of season 2. I still enjoyed her. Don't get me wrong. I still think her story overall was good. But I wasn't as impressed with season 1, and I think some of the scenes she was in, some of the storylines centered on her were the weakest of the season, such as when they went to Shogun World. That felt really uninspired. It didn't really have anything to do with anything. And sure, we did get more character development on Maeve. She did have. So it wasn't a complete waste of an episode, but for the most part, they could have done her character development in other ways that were more relevant to the story. In the Shogun story itself, I mean, just how they showed up and they were rehashing, the breaking into the brothel and stealing the safe and whatever. There's just a different version. I did kind of like how Sizemore was there, and he was just like, he was like, well, sorry, just because he wrote the narrative and basically saying that he's out of ideas and just ripped off what he did in Westworld, which I thought was actually a funny spin on it. But overall, like the whole thing about the geisha or whoever getting captured by the shoguns and then her getting killed and them having to do the dance and then the madam killing the guy. I was like, this is a bit silly. It is a bit like typical, and we don't really need to be spending all this time on this. It's funny because everyone was so excited about seeing Shogun World, including myself, at the end of season 1, because it was like, wow, there's a whole nother world with these samurais. It's going to be so awesome to see. And when we actually do see it, it's not very interesting. And I think maybe it felt to me that maybe the writers were sort of forced because there was so much excitement over the Shogun thing. It's like, oh, we better do the Shogun thing, but they couldn't think of a way to actually incorporate it into the story, so it felt more of an aside. But I will say I did like Maeve's relationship with Sizemore. Sizemore had a lot of character development this season because last season, let's be frank, he was a bit of a two-dimensional wimp, idiot. I didn't much care for him. This season he became a lot more dynamic and actually went from being this scared wimp to totally, like, I don't know if I'd say he was in love with Maze, but he totally trusted her in the journey he went through this, because at first he was just trying to get away from this crazy host trying to kill him, but then he ends up going on this journey where he was actually sticking up for her when she was being dissected or torn asunder and trying to save her. And he actually ends up, sacrificing himself for her, which, to be fair, I wasn't complete. That seemed a bit artificial to me that he would actually kill himself. I mean, especially once she had already started riding away, he could have been like when he first got shot, that's okay. But when they were further enough away, he could have just been like, okay, fine, I surrender, because the security guys clearly didn't want to kill him. And they're like, sir, put down the gun. We don't have a problem with you. But he's like, oh, blah, blah, and just reciting lines. I think that was fine at the start, but as I said, once they got further enough away, I think he should have. It just felt a bit fake that he went all the way with killing himself, which didn't seem necessary. And it seems like this is the kind of cowardly guy. I know character development and all, but it's still out of his nature, still a cowardly guy who wouldn't unnecessarily throw his life away like that, because they were further enough away. He did his job of distracting. It was after he got shot the first time he could give up and be like, okay, you're right, I give up, take me in. So I thought that felt fake. But whatever, for the most part, I did really enjoy his storyline. And this is something I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback on, a lot of disagreement, but I don't give a shit, I'm going to say it anyway. Maeve's ability to control the host seems very dependent on the plot to me. Now, I know there's an in-universe reason. Sorry. There's an in-universe reason for why she can only control certain hosts and not others. It's because some are quote-unquote woke or whatever, and she can only control the little minions, which does make empirical sense. But the way it's executed seems tad bit too convenient to me. Personally, I mean, this is my opinion. As I said, I know everyone and their mother is going to disagree with me on this, but I don't care. I'm saying it anyway. I think the way it was executed, particularly in the Shogun episode, again, something I had an issue with it, because those Shogun people who kidnapped her didn't work on them. That seemed very much like plot convenience. And you could say, oh, it's because they were woke. Were they? Were they really? Because they went straight to reenacting that same storyline that Sizemore wrote for them. But you can say, oh no, because Sizemore kept saying how the Shogun world was different things were happening and things were happening that shouldn't be happening, blah, 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 blah. But things were happening like the people, the minions, the evil Shoguns or whoever they were acting out of character as well, and she could control them. So she could control those guys who are acting out of behavior, but she can control these other guys who are also acting out of behavior. And I would argue none of them were woke. I think, and I think mainly like people like Ichika and the Ghost Nation, they were obviously woke. So I totally buy that why her magic or her mind control thing wouldn't work on them. That I didn't have an issue with that at all. But Lawrence, I mean, is he really that woke? I don't think so. It's because all the other minions who was with William, she was able to mind control, but not Lawrence. It's because Lawrence is the main character and those others are background actors. I know everyone says you're wrong, Mark, you're wrong, but I don't give a fuck. This is really how it came off to me, that her power to control other hosts seemed really dependent on the plot. I don't give a shit. That's what I think. Anyway, I don't yeah, like, and her whole quest to find her daughter, like, that was touching, and I did love how when Sizemore would suggest, oh, she's not your daughter, he's like, ah, fuck you, and went to kill him. And it showed that even though, like, technically it wasn't, she still had that connection, and she was still willing to risk everything for it, and I thought that was sweet, that was nice, it was interesting, and of course, you know, yeah, so the whole thing was really good. I like the resolution of it and how you know, it was sacrifices herself basically to get her daughter into this other world. So yeah, so that all played out. So ultimately, I'm not saying I didn't like her storyline, because I ultimately did. I just don't think it was as strong as her season 1 storyline, me personally, and there were a lot of flaws throughout, but overall it all worked and I did really like it. Now let me just briefly talk about Kichita. I really love this character. I love the way that, you know, he was just this nameless sort of brute, like he going around, you know, kidnapping children, killing people, and you think he's evil, but then you learn his whole backstory and say, like, he's actually a woke host. In some ways he's very good-natured, less so than Dolores. And the interesting thing about him is that he's programmed. He was programmed to be this, you know, stereotypical savage with no basis in reality, that he's just a typical villain, that so the guests can come in and feel like they killed this evil guy, but he defies his programming. So it's kind of actually different than Dolores, because Dolores kind of gives into her Wyatt programming and becomes this evil guy, whereas Kichita doesn't really, and sort of has different motivations. But I kind of caught on to this. I think it was kind of obvious when he went to take Maeve's daughter, that he was trying to relate to Maeve, saying, no, look, I'm on your side, you know, I'm just trying to help. And she's like, no, I'm going to kill you. I think she didn't really, yeah, even then when I saw the episode, I was like, no, he's actually, there's more to him than this. So it was great getting his episode, his backstory. It was such a well-told backstory, a well-told episode. A lot of people are saying it's the best episode of the show. Some people apparently are saying that it's one of the best episodes of television ever. That's not how I feel. I think I wouldn't go that far. In fact, I wouldn't even say it's my favorite of the season. I kind of liked episode 9, maybe the finale, better. Maybe that one with Delos, I don't know, but it's up there. It was definitely a good episode. It was definitely amongst my favorites of the season. I just, again, don't think it's the bee's knees, and part of it did feel kind of like an aside. Like, I love the fact we focused on him, but it did seem like, well, what about the other stuff with Bernard? What about the other stuff with Dolores? And now we did get some character development. We found out what happened to William. We see Emily come and take him, and we see, you know, Maeve, because it was a huge revelation in Maeve's storyline that he was telling the story to her, because they made it appear, they did a fake out, made it appear that he was telling the story to her daughter, but you find out at the end that he was actually talking to her through the thing, and that's why her mind was active, and he was explaining all this to her, so that sort of makes her realize, like, makes her challenge what she thought she knows. So it was a great character development for her. So I'm not saying it doesn't touch on any of our main characters, but it didn't touch on enough of the story for my taste. But not saying that it's a bad episode. As I said, still one of my favorite episodes of the season. I just don't think it's the bee's knees best thing ever. But it did play out really well. You got his backstory, although I will say that even as much as I did really love that scene where he woke up in the headquarters or whatever to look for his wife and found like the dead husk of her and was really sad, and he was walking around the place to see all these, you know, hosts being invented or whatever. That scene did feel a bit like a rehash of the Maeve scene from season 1, which is still my favorite scene, where she woke up. Now, I've heard the argument, and this is a fair argument, there's a lot of valid points to this, that that was kind of the whole point of that scene. That was meant to be a different version of the scene in season 1, because in actual linear timeline, the scene with Kichita takes place way before the scene with Maeve, so what she went through, he had already gone through years before her, so it puts a different spin on things, it puts a different thing on perspective, so I think they were trying to make it a bit similar, to make that point, that this is, that he had already gone through what she had gone through, and so he's a bit more wise and already had this experience, so he'd already been through this before, and as I said, really powerful scene, really loved it, but I still can't help but feel just from, if you take away the in-universe excuses, I think from a out of universe writing standpoint, it did seem like, oh, this scene really worked in season 1, so let's do another version of it in season 2. I know, maybe I'm being cynical, and that maybe the story purposes and the way it fits into the story override that, which is why I say again, still really like the scene, but I do think that's a factor. It did have that slight feeling, so it makes you think it is a lesser version of the season 1 thing, but they're both great scenes. But this one, season 1 was a bit better. Just saying. Anyway, so I did really like this episode. I like the different twists it had on everything, but I don't think it was the bee's knees. Anyway, let me move on. After rambling a bit, let me move on to Bernard. So, this is interesting. This is probably my favorite aspect of the entire season, was the way the season played with linear time. And that's another signature of Jonathan Nolan, which I think worked really well here. The way the whole season starts with Bernard waking up and and this river or whatever, or ocean or lake or whatever the hell it was, body of water, and security guys, and his main beef guy from Delos, who the actor looks so fucking familiar to me, and I was like, who the hell is this guy? And it took me forever, and I finally figured out it's Floki from Vikings. Holy shit. Did not recognize him because he's wearing a business suit and speaking with an American accent and not acting all crazy and leaning over and going, what are you doing? So it took me a while to recognize him. So, but that was cool. I did like Bernard's interactions with Floki. I heard the argument that these scenes were mainly just like exposition, and that Floki's character was Strand. Let's call him Strand. He was just there to like drive exposition and say, okay, this is what's happening, this is why, what's going on. But it's kind of like a detective, like I think Jonathan Nolan even described it as kind of a typical noir detective device, where you have this investigator who's trying to figure out what happened, and you see through the flashbacks what actually happened, and it slowly pieces together. I personally love that, especially the way that it started from the very first episode, and you got these scenes interjected with the scenes that take place in the past, which is the majority of the episode, and then also sprinkled in was other flashbacks from even further back, like the thing with Delos and stuff, that really plays with linear time, and I love it. I think then the finale got maybe a little bit too confusing, but for the most part, it reminds me a lot of Memento. It's the whole Nolan thing, I guess, which for me, Memento was like the perfect way of playing with linear time. And having these things move on concurrently with each other. I think they did the same thing here, and I loved it. I'm so glad. I think this is like 10 times better than if they played it like a straight linear thing. And it mainly makes me want to go back and watch this season again, but it was so great. Because it would give you a different spin on this whole 2 weeks later storyline, actually knowing what came before you watched it. But I did like how I didn't know what came before when I first saw it, but when I want to watch it again, I will know. So I love it. I think it really worked. And of course, yeah, Bernard sort of goes through a journey here and there. So at one point he meets up with Elsie, and I gotta be honest, I don't think this character was very well developed. I think in season 1, the whole thing, they never explained what happened to her, and it almost became like a whole thing with Barb from Stranger Things. Oh, what happened to Elsie? What Elsie? Justice for Elsie? So I think the producer, I get the impression, could be completely wrong, but I get the impression that producers were sort of pressured into writing her back in the show, and I don't think she felt that fully developed to me, or felt that necessary to the plot. I did like the stuff where, you know, Ford was appearing to Bernard and saying, kill her, and Bernard's like, get out of my head. That was awesome, and how he even had to go as far as to delete the Ford programming from his program so he didn't kill her. But what Ford was saying is, she'll betray you, and he was right. In the finale, she does in fact betray him. But it's funny because Charlotte kills her because she knows that she's read her profile, she knows the type of person that she is, and apparently she is a good person at heart, which is not what Charlotte needs. Charlotte needs evil fuckers. So she's like, you're too good of a person, so boom, you're dead. And that's what sort of drives Bernard to go and kill Charlotte, so it was great as a plot device. Her character really worked in that way to move the story forward. But as a character itself, I thought she was kind of bland, personally, and I feel like her bringing her back to life, and well, not back to life, but showing what happened to her and bringing her back into the story, I should say, felt kind of like, okay, audience, you want to know what happened to her? Here she is, kind of thing. But overall, I did like that. I did like, and of course we got to talk about Bernard when he goes inside the, I can't even remember what it's called now. But not the Forge, but the other thing with the host words. I'm sorry, brain farting. But he goes inside that place, and that's where he finds Ford. And because we got the hints in William's storyline that Ford was still around, sure enough, he did kind of the same thing Delos did, except he didn't try to put his consciousness into physical form, because that's the thing with Delos proves that does not work. So he keeps it in digital form. That was fascinating. I did really like that, and of course he does sort of latch on to Bernard when he comes out of it, and sort of being a voice in his head saying "kill her," and it's like that stuff was cool. And it was cool. Like after he deleted after he deleted Ford from his programming, he was seeing Ford again, but you find out that that wasn't the Ford programming. That's just Bernard hallucinating, so kind of showing that he's kind of more human or whatever, because hosts usually don't daydream or hallucinate or whatever you call it. So that was fascinating. It was great use of Ford. I love it. Like a lot of people were like, oh, I thought Anthony Hopkins was off the show. Well, it was a brief like cameo, a couple episodes, so it's not like he's a main character. So when he said he's not on the show anymore, I'm pretty sure he meant as a main character. But anyway, love that. That was very well used. And of course, now let me get into this whole finale where he meets up with Dolores, and they go inside the Forge, and he has this, and they meet up with the system manager of the Forge, who is represented by Logan, which is really fascinating. I really love these scenes. He kind of explains that the reason why recreating human beings didn't work is because they were treating them like they were really complex, but really they're not. Really, human beings are really simple. They simply just do the same things over and over again. They always repeat the same mistakes. They're not that complicated. And so once you realize that, it's easier to create them. And so this gets back to the whole theme of the episode, or the theme of the season, really, of free will. What does it mean? Does it really exist? What are the limitations of it? And if you believe this Logan representation, that it doesn't really exist, it's not a real thing, which I personally don't think is the case, but I don't think the show is telling me this. The show's just presenting one viewpoint, which is obviously the viewpoint of this mechanical system. So you don't have to take it at face value. So it's great. It's good discussion. It's good analysis. But that's the conclusion this system has come to. And so they have all the guests, all the data they compiled on all the guests, truncated into these books that Dolores is going around reading, and I think these will play a big part in season 3. So that was all really fascinating. Love that stuff, and I love how they created this other world for the host to go to. And this really ties into Akecheta's storyline, because he keeps talking about a door to a different world where they're not being toyed with, where their lives aren't being messed with just for, people's entertainment, where they can live in peace and be who they want to be. And so they create this basically iCloud. It's a digital world. And it's really interesting. It's a really interesting concept, because you think about these are artificial intelligent beings, so they don't really need physical form the way the humans do. That you could think of it kind of like San Junipero again, that it's like a digital reality, but I think it's even has a different connotation because it's for artificial intelligence, and I think they may view the world differently. Now, Dolores still views it as a different cage, that because she wants to live in the real world. And then, and again, like too much heavy existential shit that I can't get into in this one review. But again, it's like the questioning the nature of reality. And I love how she has a callback as when she asked Bernard, like, I think maybe when in the flashbacks when he was testing her, like, what is real? And he says, real is what cannot be replaced. So she brings that point up again. Real is what cannot be replaced. And so this other world is not really real. Interesting stuff. But basically, they use the door so a lot of the hosts can escape. And I love how when they go through the door, their body just collapses in the river. So at the start of this season, we see all these dead bodies. We think all the hosts are dead. Not all of them. Some of them actually made it into this iCloud thingy. But their bodies had died, but their essence of who they were actually survived and lived on in this thingy. So that was really fascinating. I did really like that aspect of it a lot. But of course, Dolores tries to destroy it, so Bernard has to kill her. And in this future 2 weeks later timeline, you already see Floki and the others come across Dolores' dead body. So it's like, all right, she's already dead and she died, and that's what this is. But then, of course, you realize that's not actually the case, because, as I said, after Charlotte kills Elsie, Bernard decides to kill Charlotte, and he does it in a very inventive way by creating a host version of Charlotte and putting Dolores' essence, her little orb, inside her. So it's basically Dolores and the Charlotte body. Weird. And then how the Charlotte body comes and kills the actual Charlotte. Very creepy scene. Loved it. Very effective. And again, as I said, it puts a spin on the whole season, because now you have to realize that this person in this future storyline who we thought was Charlotte the whole time actually wasn't Charlotte. It was Dolores. Poof, mind blown. Amazing twist. Absolutely loved it. And of course, this version of Dolores has changed her mind now, which I don't know why she changed her mind all of a sudden, but hooray for her. And realizes that she shouldn't destroy the iCloud. Instead, she puts it in a place where no human can find it, which is the better option, obviously. So all these hosts can live happily ever after, but in this cloud. And then she kills Bernard, but she takes his little orb and several other little orbs of other hosts who we don't know who yet. Mystery for season 3, and leaves the park. Now, I do love this, how the Stubbs, the security guy, confronts her and basically implies that he knows that she isn't Charlotte and knows that she's the host, but lets her leave anyway. I didn't really explain how he knows this. Maybe he's just really familiar with hosts and how they work, and he can spot the difference between a human and a host just by looking at them, or maybe he had some background information on her. But why he lets her leave, I think, is a lot more clear, because Floki and those other asshole Bellas guys were treating him like shit. They were saying, oh, we don't give a fuck about the guests, let them die. And it's obvious they're assholes, and he wasn't on board with the bullshit that they were doing. He's basically, not just the guests, but all the security folk and the people who work there, they were going to let them all die just so they could get their corporate secrets. So he's like, no, fuck them. So if this, evil host wants to get out and fuck with them, go for it. So that I thought was great. Liked it. Made a lot of sense. And then, of course, we see once Dolores is out, she has that machine because she goes to Arnold's old house. So she recreates her own body. She recreates the body for Bernard. And then we see the Charlotte body still there, but we don't really know who's inside it. Ooh, mystery, mystery. So, and they had this cool at the end of the season, this cool dynamic where even after, Dolores saves Bernard, recreates his body, gets him out of the park, and pretty much, saves his life, but they still establish and agree that they have opposing objectives, and that they're sort of the yin and the yang, and they're not going to agree with each other, and they're going to fight each other, but Dolores seems okay with this. That's interesting. Again, this is another thing I'd have to analyze deeper to get more deeply into this, but on the surface, loved it, thought it was great, absolutely amazing way to end the season, in my opinion. Anyway, we'll get to my rating for Westworld Season 2 out of 10 is a 9. Excellent. As I said, the more I watch this, I might bring this up to a 10. We'll just have to see. But for the moment, there were a few issues with us towards the beginning of the season. I don't want to say pacing issues because it wasn't nearly as bad as the pacing issues in Season 1. But this stuff with the Shogun World and a few other things I thought was kind of asides and wasn't as interesting. But overall, hell of a lot more powerful stuff. As I said, very heavy, a lot of sort of things to ponder over, a lot of things it's going to be better in second viewings. Those are the best kinds of TV shows. Those are the best kind of films. Very heavy, very interesting, a lot of great character stories, strong characters, strong action, strong production value, strong everything. So, absolutely amazing season. So that's it for my review of Westworld Season 2. At the moment, I am covering The Expanse as that wraps up at Season 3. I'll be doing mini videos about that, so you can check that out. And I also do other videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Babylon 5, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.